안녕하세요. 저는 돼지배우터의 정대리입니다. 오늘은 스페인에서 오신 굉장히 유명한 아프리카 돼지열병의 전문가인 호세 마누엘 박사님을 모시고 아프리카 돼지열병의 현재 상황과 아프리카 돼지열병이 어떻게 진행될지, 그리고 또 어떤 것들을 하면 우리가 아프리카 돼지열병을 좀 대비할 수 있을지에 대해서 간단하게 이야기를 나누어 보도록 하겠습니다. Jose, could you please introduce yourself?
Okay. My name is José Manuel Sánchez Vizcaíno. I am veterinarian and full professor of animal health at the University of Madrid, as well as the director of the OIE reference laboratory for African swine fever, located also in my university in Madrid, Spain.
Okay. Could you please explain about the current global situation of African swine fever?
Sure. African swine fever now is really out of control. This is already affecting 3 continents, Africa, Europe and Asia. And it's important to remember that in Europe and Asia is living the 78% of the total swine production. So that means that today 78% of the swine of the world are living in affected area. So that is very worrying for the swine industry. I think it's the worst situation is the worst threat for sure of the swine industry around the world.
Many people are wondering how China is doing right now. So could you briefly explain about the Chinese situation?
Sure. China is suffering a lot at this moment because the disease is spread very quickly. So only in 7 months they almost infected the whole country, as well as other countries in the area like Vietnam, Cambodia, Hong Kong also. And so the disease spread very, very quickly. It's probably due to many factors, risk factors that the Chinese industry used to have, historical and probably related with their own system and their sociology, but the disease is spreading very, very fast. So at this moment in all Asia, the people are terribly worried that the disease could spread even more countries in the Asian continent.
So now, what are the characteristics of African swine fever virus?
Well, one of the characteristics of African swine fever is that it's really not well known virus. People confuse African swine fever with other viruses, and so that make quite a lot of confusions to control the disease in an appropriate way. It's a disease that also have a lot of variations depending of the virus itself. There are from attenuated strain to very acute or even asymptomatic virus, and the way how the ASF is spread is completely different than classical swine fever or foot and mouth or PRRS. So African swine fever is not very efficient in the transmission by aerosol, but is terribly resistant. So one of the strong points of African swine fever is that it's a very resistant virus in the environment. So when you have the virus in one carcass or just in the field, the virus is going to resist for for long period of time. Also, the virus is not only resistant, but also they are very easy to transmit by blood, because the virus is attached to the erythrocytes. So in one single drop of blood, you can find more than 3,000 copies of the virus. So blood is the mechanism that make main transmissions. And in some places, the people use blood for feed animal, or sometimes they use swill feeding. So that means that they use meat that has been produced, swine meat that has been produced from infected pigs. So the virus resists a lot in that conditions, and this is one of the other mechanisms. So the most important is 3 points. One, the contact between direct animals, that means sick or carriers, and ASF also carrier animals are present. The contact between domestic or wild boar affected for the disease with domestic or with wild boar is one mechanism of infection, especially if they fight or discuss and some blood is produced. Because as I mentioned, in blood is very easy. Also, if the animals have, the sick animal have diarrhea, it's a fantastic way of transmissions. So this is one mechanism. So we have to be carefully with when the animals are in contact with your own animals. So you have to make biosafety to avoid that the wild boar can contact your domestic animal. The other mechanism is very important, is the thrill feeding. So use leftover of human diseases, human food, that has been produced with meat of sick animals, sick ASF animal. So, and this meat, the virus is going to be very, very resistant as well. So if you give the leftover to the pigs, they're going to become infected very easy. So be careful with the thrill feeding. This is another important mechanism. Be careful with that. This is very, very important. The third one is when you do a necropsis and your farm and you are taking blood all over, you are not carefully with the necropsies and there's blood all over and you don't clean or disinfect it well, later you are going to propagate the virus in your farm. So be careful with the necrosis, be careful with blood. This is terribly important, and I think this is a very important. Also in summer, you have to remember that if blood is there in your farm or you are doing a necropsis and it's summer and it's flights around, the flights are going to be vector, mechanic vector of the blood. They don't replicate it in the virus don't replicate it in flights, but the flights can transport it by the legs from one farm to another. So the vehicles that are contaminated with blood or with diarrhea, that is terrible if they are not clean and disinfected. So be careful with the transportation of animal and trucks that are not clean and disinfected. This is another very important mechanism. I think these are the four most important mechanisms of transmission.
What will be the most dangerous risk factors? Korea.
Well, the most important is several factors. The first one is if you are importing meat that is contaminated because you bring the meat from another infected country, that could be a very high risk because you are going to process the meat and later they can be thrill feeding. That is a good way. The other way is the entrance of live animal. So live animal is difficult because you are not importing live animal from any infected country. So I don't think this is danger, but could be the wild boar. The wild boar can come from areas in the continent, in Asia, continents that are infected, and they can come by crossings border or by swimming or many, many different ways. So the wild boar are also a very important way of contaminations. You also can be infected by the tourists or persons that came from infected countries with food and for human, but they not only use for human, also they can give it to the animals direct or an indirect way. This is a very common way of infection. So you have to be carefully with all the tourists that came by boat or by airport, especially more in boat because the control is usually more poor than in airports, that they don't bring any feed or any food that can be produced with swine. So that is very, very important. And the last one is vehicles. Vehicles that can transport pigs here, but they are from countries that are infected and that are not well cleaned or disinfected.
Okay. So how can we stop the introduction of African swine fever virus to Korea?
Well, there are two ways to stop that. One is at national level. So controlling the airport, controlling the harbor, controlling the wild boar in some areas of your country that are not depending of the farmers, but are very important. Controlling the soil feeding, not producing soil feeding yourself. I think this is very important, and I think you need to tell the farmers which are the most important mechanisms of transmissions, because most of the farmers don't know that, and it's important that they know it. So this is the first help, is a level of the authorities or the farmer association to inform all this situation to farmers. The other point is enhance of the farmers and how the virus can come inside of one farm. They can come by vehicles, contaminated vehicles, so they have to be very careful with the disinfection of these vehicles. The other point is that they can bring it with the worker of the farms, that they bring their own food, and this food could be contaminated. So that's a very important issue. So you have to tell the people, be careful, don't bring food, never, from swine origin to the farms. The third one are visitors, that they came to see the farms or to buy your animals. You have to take shower of all these guys, change complete the clothes, especially shoes. The shoes have to be out, totally out, and change it with your own clothes. That is very important as well. And finally, the biosecurity of the farms to avoid the contact with the wild boar, because this is another source of contamination. So you have to put double fence, because the wild boar jumping quite well, or they going under the floor and they crossing easily. So you need a double fence to really be strong in the contact, to avoid the contact with the wild boar. And these are the main important point to do and to following.